Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Casey Felton-Lui. I know this has been quite the week and quite the eclipse season, so I'm going to ask us all to take a deep breath together and exhale. And the nice thing about breath work is that it's something that many of us can come back to whenever we need it. We can hopefully step away from whatever it is that's giving us anxiety or weighing on us and just reconnect with like the most basic aspect of our existence, right? The breath. And regardless of what's going on in the outside world, we always have to remember how important it is to take care of ourselves, to slow down. And I know that there are many people in the world who live in areas that are being affected by climate disasters, by genocides, by other conflicts that make it very difficult for them to take care of themselves effectively. And of course, we always need to keep that in mind as we move through our day to day, that it's important that we think about those people, that we act on behalf of those people because they are not always able to in the way that we are. So it is important collectively that we remember our basic human needs and that we tend to them so we can stay in this fight, that we can stand up for ourselves and build a more just world together. So, deep breaths as we move through the rest of this week. And I hope that today's episode is helpful as we move through this energy together. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by artist and organizer Abby Mahler to talk about their work with the Wayside and Airgasmic LA. Then stay tuned for a look at the astrology of the week ahead and my thoughts on how to move through this moment. I'm very excited to be joined by Abby Mahler today. You are an activist and an organizer, and that's how I came to know you. So, welcome to Petty Astrology.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, we met at a COVID safer gathering earlier this year, and I was like, oh my God, I know you. I know you from my FYP because there are what feels like so few people online making content about how serious COVID is, about the research around, living in a way that there's not that many of us, it feels like, left, still taking COVID seriously. So
There are dozens of us.
there are literally dozens of us still taking precautions. And so that's how you caught my attention. I was like, oh my God, I know you. Just like the worst thing that you want to hear out in public. But I was like, do you get recognized a lot?
I not usually outside of places that I'm expected to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also a photographer, and so sometimes at local drag shows is where I have gotten recognized the most frequently.
That's a brag.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. As not a king myself, it is funny to be a face that is known. But I also got recognized on the street in Highland Park last week. It was so bananas. Yeah. My girlfriend was ready to throw down. She was like, I don't know this person who could be. And then they were like, I really love your content. You make TikToks. I was like, oh, thank you. So it was a very kind interaction. It was very sweet.
I also came to know you because when you're in this community, there are local groups that, host gatherings, events, share resources. And I just kept seeing you pop up on these group pages. So I know that you're very involved in sort of the LA COVID community at this point. And so I wanted to talk to you today about what led you to activism in general, because you seem like a very active activist.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad I at least look busy.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I do keep committing to too many things. So perhaps I simply am busy despite always feeling like I'm not doing enough. In terms of Activism is something that I feel like I've been involved in some kind of way since I
Hmm.
was quite young. I want to say middle school. I remember, doing Day of Silence in middle school, which I feels,
Hmm.
that's like a thing that you do yourself when you are in the seventh grade. But
Right.
as I got into high school, I joined groups just at my school.
Mm.
GSA. There were a couple of other social justice to use a buzzword kind of groups that met once a year if not more frequently at my school, and so joined those. Eventually was GSA president when I was a senior, so it's definitely not out of the realm of things that I've done, but I feel like I'm the most active I've ever been at this point because it really is just another level that we're living through at this point.
Yeah.
I have been doing anti-COVID work since March 2020. If folks don't know the lore, my foray into anti-COVID activism began in a kind of unique way. I am one of at least 825,000 lupus patients who was unable to access my essential daily medication, hydroxychloroquine, when our fair president at the time decided to promote it on the world stage. But it, of course,
Mm.
wasn't just him, it was Elon Musk and a lot of other right wing figures. And so I started speaking publicly about that when I was unable to refill my prescription. And it has snowballed in so many unexpected ways to where I am now.
It feels like so many organizers in general often get involved in organizing because it relates directly to the life that they're living. It feels like in your case, this era of activism for you, it was like not even you almost didn't even get a choice.
Definitely felt strangely preordained, and not to put too fine a point on it on an astrology podcast, but my Saturn return literally
Mhm.
began at the end of March 2020, so it it did feel as though it was a little in the stars. But I find belief interesting as a general theme in my life. I'm interested in why people believe what they believe, myself included. And so I'm not sure whether I believe that it
Mhm.
was preordained,
Sure.
but did I feel like I had a choice? Not particularly. If I
Mhm.
really wanted to understand, why this was not only happening to me, but
Mhm.
clearly so many others,
Yeah.
then, when it became clear that no one else was doing the work that needed to be done and making the connections that needed to be clearly stated, I started connecting with the few other people that I felt like were scratching the surface, and many of them are not disabled themselves. Many of them are doctors, which is, a contentious ally to have as a disabled person.
Right.
So yeah, it is. It's been an interesting journey to connect with folks across disciplines because when it comes to something as complex and complex is simply the word. There are so many different levels of scale at which uh, different forces were operating to make my medication inaccessible. So talking to just different kinds of experts and this, that, and the other. Really learning why people not only believe what they believe but how they came to those beliefs.
Well, you said something that is so Sagittarian that we must stop and talk to the audience about what's going on with your astrology, which, that's kind of part of why we're here, aren't we? So, you're a Sagittarius sun, so and you have a beautiful Sagittarius necklace on right now as well. I appreciate you labeling. Let's talk about your astrology a little bit. So, you're a Virgo rising, which for people who are new to me, I have a just I don't know what it is. I just keep attracting Virgo risings. I love a Virgo rising. So you have a Libra moon and you are a Sagittarius Mercury as well as Venus and Mars. So that's your big six. And that's a lot of Sagittarius. So you saying that you're very interested in how people come to the beliefs that they have. I mean that's like the essence of Sagittarius energy. Just like thank you, that was a lovely gift. And just from the limited knowledge I have of you, our parasocial relationship, me watching your videos,
And now it's social, isn't that thrilling?
Right? I know. We've bridged the gap. So the parasocial relationship of it all, I was like, Abby is somebody that obviously speaks their beliefs. And I'm honestly kind of not surprised that you have taken up this like almost spokesperson type of role in the COVID organizing that you've done because you are obviously a very good communicator. And I think that people, like, when they're talking about activism and organizing, don't realize that, like, a lot of the skills that they have naturally, there's like it translates to whatever kind of activism you might be interested in because no matter what sort of group it is, they or cause that you're working on, communication is a huge part of it. So, people like you who are not only good at messaging, communicating information, I mean, Sagittarius is the sign of the teacher. So, like, teacher, preacher, anybody who's relaying a message kind of in a larger sense, very Sagittarian. So, like, congrats on fulfilling that energy very very well, I would say. So it makes sense to me that you do what you do and you are able to teach people essentially. The other thing about it is that watching people like you who have been brave enough honestly to take this on because like I'm sure in March of 2020, and I would love to hear you speak about this a little bit, but I'm sure like March of 2020, the way that people were reacting to you talking about COVID was probably quite different than they are now because I feel like over the past 4 years, the level of hostility towards people who talk about COVID seems to have increased dramatically. Like, what's been your experience of that?
Yes, that is an important observation that I would wholeheartedly agree with. Things have very much changed in the way that people react to what I speak about, even if some of the verbiage is quite literally exactly the same as
Hmm.
that I've been using. And I know this because there's heaps of recordings that, there are things that I posted then, like I can literally go back and see. I think the most important observation, if I can generalize, because there are a million reasons, as many reasons as there are people to the shifts in culture that we've seen around these topics. The word that I'd use is taboo.
Hmm.
I think the role of silence, silencing, minimization, into silence, denial, and the silence that denial begets are the main antagonists that I feel like I deal with day to day. Certainly, there are the loud folks. I've talked about this on TikTok that I've had 3 incidents of people, men, screaming at me from their cars. You don't need to wear a mask, take that mask off, whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. Um, just in the last month,
Hmm.
which is more than any other time during the pandemic. People have
Yeah.
said a lot of things to me, and people have said things about other mobility aids that I've used. Like, oh my god, when you use any kind of very visual disability aid, then people are going to comment on it. So the mask comments, I think, have been more hostile directly, but that is not across the board true. Disability as a way of existing is very evocative for
Hmm.
people and really, I think, taps into a almost primal emotion.
Yeah.
And that, yeah, that brings out a lot in people.
It's been something to watch. I've also experienced harassment just like walking down the street. And I think people that I've talked to that live elsewhere have been really surprised that like we in, liberal California and Los Angeles are like dealing with this. And I don't think people understand that like liberals are some of the most hostile to us at this point.
Not only, I would say, liberals hold a hostility that people may be surprised by, but I think folks who do not know the makeup of California, the makeup of Los Angeles, the culture around religion here are surprised that it is more prevalent and intense than expected. I think people really think of LA as this, blue oasis of sorts. And while it's not to say that that population isn't very present, conspirituality is a word that I like to use as somebody who grew up and worked a lot on the West Side. I ran into a lot of these folks for my entire life, essentially. But the place where these outlandish beliefs about health meet are outside of any easy left-right distinction.
I too have been very baffled by how we started the pandemic and, Trump was president then. So I felt that liberals were very loud about taking COVID precautions at that point because it was, a reflection of their resistance to Trump. And then, of course, when Trump's presidency ended and Biden was elected, it seemed like that was a huge tide shift, at least for people that considered themselves like more progressive. So I have also been very surprised at the way things have been going. And I guess, we've never lived through something like this before. So it's like we only know what we know. But like so much is like clicking for me about like human psychology these days and how what seems like, the government gave up because probably money, probably, not wanting to spend money and resources doing a bunch of stuff that would show us that the government is capable of doing a lot more for us than they actually do. But it feels like people don't really want to have to think about something that is really hard to live with, as you and I know. Is like, watching people that we care about destroy their health, watching people that we know that are, taking precautions and doing the best they can while everybody else is not taking precautions makes us more vulnerable. So we're watching them also get COVID because, you can one-way masking we know only does so much and it's so rampant that it's very like very hard. I don't want to downplay for listeners taking preventative measures. I think is really important. And like for me, I have no known infections because of the masking and because of all the precautions that have just become a normal part of my life. So I don't want to downplay like you can take precautions, but it's not foolproof, especially when nobody else is really taking precautions. From an astrological perspective, I feel like this concept of us being a collective, right? Us being people that share public space has really gotten lost socially. And of course, like we're better for that to happen than, individualistic United States of America. So I feel like we're just seeing like where that leads and how detrimental it is to like everybody. And so for those of us who are aware of this, it's a lot to hold. And then not only that, but dealing with harassment, like active harassment. So, I've dealt with harassment, but I feel like for people like you who are putting themselves out there online and being a spokesperson, I know that you've been like interviewed by some pretty major publications and were you on Libs of TikTok or something like that? You've had a lot thrown at you.
I did get posted to Libs of TikTok, but for all of the things that, Hayaricha could have said about me, nothing she said was like outright wrong per se. Like she did call me a woman, which isn't my favorite word, but it's not wrong. She they diet women is kind of what my polycule of she theys likes to joke.
Right.
We're Diet Coke lovers, diet women.
Same, honestly.
Yeah.
I love that.
So my gender is much more political than it is personal, as it were. She could have gone for just about anything that I've said about a number of disinformation doctors that I know that she's more than lightly aware of. But she didn't. She just went for me going to see a Taylor Swift concert. Oh, and she did say that I was holding a backpack instead of a tote bag, so that was wrong.
You have to
But
clear that up.
I do. I think the Libs of TikTok post was probably the largest scale, most annoying, but I have been in a number of publications, CNN, New York Times, BuzzFeed News, plenty, talking about things that may be of more salacious interest to a higher right chick of sorts. Yeah, she didn't go for any of that. There are a couple of things that have happened over the past couple of years, especially when it comes to people on the right that I would consider abjectly dangerous, that I don't necessarily talk about broadly, but if you talk to me in person, I will regale stories of events that transpired around the insurrection. Speaking out has touched my life in a number of ways that have been less than pleasant, but none of them have outweighed what disability has done to me, losing abilities, losing my ability to play music, and the pain that, my 8 month C. diff infection caused me. Those realities are far more salient than the possibilities that could come with speaking out. And thus far, I still feel like it's all been worth it.
I appreciate that people like you have done this because there are so many of us who, like, I have a very small internet platform, but I don't feel like there's just like I don't think people are gonna listen to me if I start like making a bunch of COVID content. But like something that I've thought about even in the videos that I've posted wearing a mask is like, well, the potential for people to start harassing me because I'm wearing a mask in this video, you know, it's definitely there, and it's like something that you have to calculate for. And so I really can't even imagine like what it's been like for you to just have to move through this. But like again, it's a matter of your health and your ability to continue living life as best as you can. So I feel like a lot of activism is just out of necessity and like understanding how very serious this issue and so many other issues are. I think a lot of people that, are scrolling and love to be like hateful, I guess, they like to look at people that are talking about these things online and assume that that's all that they're doing. And I think that's really hilarious, honestly, to like meet a stranger online and then see one video or one tweet or whatever, and then be like, I know everything about this person. I just, masterful thinking for me. I'm like, wow. I mean, you do plenty of stuff that is you make videos about it too, like that is offline, that is very actively involved in making Los Angeles a safer place to be while we live through the COVID pandemic. And so I know that you're really involved in the Wayside and Orgasmic LA. And I want listeners to know what these groups are because the government has just like abdicated everything with COVID, a lot of these groups that are popping up all around the country and all around the world are just like groups of people, groups of friends that are literally our public health system at this point. And so that was another way that I was like I kept seeing Abby, and I was like, I know you're very involved in both of these groups. So let's start with the Wayside. So how did your involvement in the Wayside come about? And also, what is it?
Yeah, so I'm involved in a good handful of groups. I'm involved in Airgasmic, which is our local clean air club
Mhm.
for specifically queer nightlife. But if we can help with other things, that's not out of the realm of possibility. Um, there is the Wayside, which I kind of it's grown a lot in
Mhm.
very recent history, and so the identity crisis begins. But I like to try and describe it as kind of an umbrella place to go where you just know things aren't right now, and
Mhm.
you want to find consolation in that with others, and then whatever kind of grows out of that, like the Wayside is a great place to do that. We just thinking about the name We Are the Wayside is it comes from a Fauci statement that I feel like many people are familiar with at this point, but I highly recommend looking up if you haven't heard him say it. He's a member of the Wayside. We are members of the Wayside. We Are the Wayside is deliberately, meant to be broad and personal. That if you are seeing what is going on right now, welcome to the Wayside. And I'm also a part of Math Block LA, and I have some feelers with a couple of other groups that I like to be able to know kind of what's going on with
Mhm.
groups, even if I'm not like extraordinarily involved. So then, if folks need help, there are shared goals, then we can connect over that as well. So I try to keep my tabs open. But when it comes to Orgasmic and Wayside, I knew some of the founding members,
Mhm.
and they were just like, "Come show up," and so I have.
I've referred people to the Wayside because there have been people that, I kind of know socially that have been experiencing probably long COVID. I think people right now, there's just so few people that are still talking about this. And I literally, I have a small private Instagram that's like 300 people that I know like in real life, from a variety, from work, from organizing, from, all kinds of stuff. So these people, we all have different relationships, but I'm one of the few people that seems like they know that are still talking about COVID. So I actually have had people reach out to me, they have no idea where to go and what to do or what's happening to them. And nobody really is talking about it except for this random bitch that they knew from a Facebook group years ago. You know what I mean? Like they're like, and I'm glad that people have noticed that I care, and I will help a stranger. So it's nice to have these groups to refer people to, and I appreciate that the Wayside seems to be a place that is inviting people that are kind of in that in between, sort of like
Yeah.
figuring out what is happening.
I think that's a great way to describe it. I think that there are a preponderance of groups popping up all over the place. There needs to be space for all of these groups because they all play an essential role in this, ecosystem that is keeping all of us alive together. Here in LA, there are a good handful of smaller groups that like to meet up for COVID cautious ventures, what have you. Sometimes it's all online, sometimes it is in person, but many of these groups are more insular. And how are you going to be able to find these places if there is not something like a Wayside that's just like, oh, you think this sucks? Us too. Like, show up once a month,
Mm-hmm.
and you will find folks and then ways into these more insular groups. I think that having these smaller spaces where people can connect with community in a way that's pretty difficult in larger group settings is essential to building up those larger groups to begin with. And going into a larger group setting when you're not so sure about all of this, that anonymity can be in and of itself a little bit comforting. You don't have to be put on the spot about what you do and don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a place to learn and to find your way into this world. So I think um, all of these groups play essential specific roles in connecting people with ways to survive.
Airgasmic LA is, I was so excited when that popped up because I first became familiar with clean air clubs. I believe it was the clean air club that's in Chicago was the first one that I saw. And for people that don't know, there are these libraries of air purifiers and things that you can essentially rent for free for different types of events. And so I was really excited to see that Los Angeles had one. And so I know that you've been a part of it from the get-go, yeah?
I think so, yeah. Definitely an early joiner.
Yeah, would you tell me a little bit about how that group kind of came to be and like the work that you guys are doing in terms of events?
Orgasmic was really born out of the local drag king scene. Drag kings in LA, especially, just these queer spaces that are a little less polished than,
Mhm.
say, your RuPaul, something that you might think of drag queen wise.
Mhm.
This is a little more scrappy, a little more thrown together, but the DIY of it all is like that kind of punk ethos that has always spoken to my heart. And Orgasmic is one of those scrappy upstarts. It truly is the brainchild, the beloved work of especially Dick Swagger, local drag king, famous drag king Dick Swagger. They have put their heart and soul into this project, and I know it's been so difficult. There have been a lot of things that we've learned along the way, but along this way, we've also lost uh, a lot of folks who used to be, prominent performers have had to step back. No one has died, to clarify, as far as I know. But I mean, their presence is far reduced to what it used to be because these repeated infections are simply unsustainable. And so folks whose livelihood is performing and around the performing arts, whether that be a punk DIY drag scene or classical music, even, that is another world that I do work in as a photographer. Any performance space needs clean air.
Mhm.
These performers are rarely masked. Blessedly, some string players have this ability, and some, drag king style performers will also perform in masks, but that has consequences, and I don't I wish it didn't. I wish it didn't have consequences. I wish it didn't change the ways that people are able to interact with their space, but it does. And so we need ways that the space can allow that performance to happen. It is livelihood. It is also just soul feeding, you know? Like these practices have been passed down through generations. You know, the love of performing feels so deeply human, and sharing in that performance space in the ways that live performance, live music, you know, live theater, these practices have been with humans for so much of history, and finding ways that they can continue, because they will continue whether or not they are safe, finding ways that they can continue more safely feels imperative, not only for the performers' livelihoods, but for all of us to find those places of solace again.
I totally agree because I'm just really mystified like by, performers that I see that are doing concerts, right? And we know that like musicians, for example, a lot of the money that they make is through touring. So it's like if you want to survive as an artist, and artists tend to be really undervalued, underappreciated, and underpaid. So I really feel for people who are performers, are drag artists, are musicians, and I wish that like I've been thinking about this a lot lately with Chapel Roan because I know that she has spoken about how she's had COVID at least a couple of times, and I would not, I mean, you're in that environment, so it's like of course that's a real possibility. And so I think about like fans. It's like, don't you want, as a fan, don't you want people that you enjoy their art to be able to continue performing? And there are artists and performers, entertainers that have either been driven into retirement, they can no longer perform anymore because they've had one or more COVID infections. So this is just something that I kind of have on the back burner in my mind when I see a lot of these artists like going out there and doing the things that they kind of have to do. And then audiences aren't protecting themselves, let alone the artist. So I'm like, wow, this is going to have some pretty massive consequences.
Yeah, I don't feel like I really have all the details on, you know, Chapel's situation, but regardless of like any specific individual, you know, we have a lot of data right now that shows multiple infections. So even without an anecdote, I'm compelled by that data, as somebody who knows what it's like to be a performer and then not be able to access that art any longer because of disability. Um, I think of kids who are refining their skills to hopefully go into performance. You know, my disability really kicked in when I was 17, 18. I tried to play for a couple more years into college when I had been hoping to go to college for music because I really didn't know what else to do. I'd been playing since fourth grade, but I was unable to even audition because my hands kind of stopped working around that period of time. And so I pivoted, did something different, still tried to play for a couple more years. And literally during my senior show in college, something shifted in my face, and I cannot even sustain a note on my instrument anymore. Just something about the seal of the ability to create breath support doesn't work.
Right.
So it's an art form that's now really inaccessible to me.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to kind of work through that was years in therapy. You know, whether or not I'm at peace with it now, up for debate.
Right.
But I have found ways to still interact with art and interact with a performance space as a photographer. And so even if I'm not faced with the reality of what performing means for me right now, I still exist in that space. I'm still working as a photographer, and being the observer doesn't really make it much easier.
I can't even imagine. And I think this is something that I wish more people had heard about, because I know that there are plenty of people out there who have been disabled to the point where they can't do the thing that they feel like they were born to do, and that's heartbreaking. And so I feel like with the way that COVID has been unfortunately so politicized, the people like us who are still talking about it and taking it as a reality because it is, we're, I think, often perceived as people. I remember, didn't you get called like a narcissist or something recently? Because I was, I'm never surprised by this shit anymore, but it's always kind of like, are you fucking serious right now? Like it's always something. And that's the kind of thinking, is like that we're just so self-obsessed and we're so like pick me that we want to wear a mask, which is just like the weirdest.
Yeah, without even asking whether or not I would like to wear a mask, which, like, me personally, if I had the choice, I probably wouldn't, because I've learned in the last couple of years something that I did not know about myself, and that is that wearing a mask can really cause me a lot of physical pain.
Right.
Again, I just talked about kind of issues in my face.
Hmm.
I don't have a good name for this. I have theories as to why I might be experiencing this pain, but I don't really know. Wearing head strap masks, especially, really triggers this. It's something about, the way
Hmm.
that the strap pulls the mask onto my face and into the back of my head that has caused me, migraines that have lasted for days.
Wow.
Is the closest thing that I can kind of describe that kind of pain as. Um, I feel it in my teeth, I feel it in my eyes, all the way down my back from my neck, and it, it's a constant balancing act as to, like, okay, well, how long am I going to be in a specific space? What does the space look like in terms of ventilation, in terms of other COVID safety measures, so that I can decide, like, what mask I'm going to have to wear, that I can wear for the amount of time I have to be in a space. And if it's a mask that is, of higher quality, like, I feel quite grateful that I've started wearing the Draker 1750s, because those guys are so soft. They're the best head strap mask I've come across so far. But in the past, maybe that meant choosing an Aura, and the Auras really, really mess with my pain.
Yeah.
Like, I have been in pain to the point of vomiting in public, and you can't vomit in public in your mask. I don't know
No.
if you've ever tried, but I have, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
So learning to balance these conflicting access needs, not only, just like in practice, but also socially, because that is another type of pushback I've received online, is like, you're not masking enough. And,
Right.
I'm masking as much as I possibly physically can. Like, I need to be able to take breaks. I need to be able to choose a mask that I'm able to wear. And even if that's not, like, the best available, the
Yeah.
best one is the one that stays on. When the other option is changing my entire life again, not that it hasn't been significantly shifted since 2020, but, I'm
Right.
still able to do this art that I spent so much time perfecting in the loss of my other art. Like, that feels like a bridge I'm not ready to cross yet,
Yeah.
without a fight. And so I keep working on that by making my community safer, because guess what? It also benefits me. It benefits us all to make these spaces systemically safer at letting individual decisions get in the way of a group project is different than letting individual needs be heard, so to be able to create a space safe enough that even somebody who is unable to wear a mask can be there, like, that's the goal.
I think if we were able to do that, like if we were socially in the position where people would voluntarily take precautions to protect themselves and the people around them, I think that would be just like a tide change in how we relate to each other just as human beings. Like,
I mean, we start to see it, these mask required shows are still an opt-in kind of situation. You don't have to come
oh,
to the
really?
show. So uh, we are starting those experiments now.
And I think that I talk about Pluto moving into Aquarius because that's happening for the next couple decades. That period will start in, I think it's November 19th. And we've had some tastes of it because of retrogrades. But what I'm really seeing is that in Pluto and Aquarius, that we will really have to step up our organizing efforts because we've got pandemics, we've got climate crisis, we've got rising fascism, and all of those things benefit from us having a more collective imagination, understanding ourselves as part of a community and probably of many communities, you know? And so I do think that I think people in general that is a new concept for them. It's intimidating. But I try to remind people, and part of the reason that I love having people like you on this show is that I like to show people that there's actually a lot of beautiful things that can and will come out of building these types of connections and doing this type of work. I try to remind people that this is joyful work at the end of the day. As much as there is harassment and all kinds of bullshit, it's such a minority of experiences, I think, overall, as compared to like the work that is being done to, make shows more accessible. And for people that are interested in doing that work, connecting with other people and literally forming these like teams that are doing amazing work in cities and towns like all over the world. I mean, what an incredible moment that we're living through on that front, so as much of a capitalist hellscape as we're living in, I also try really hard to remind people that like there is a lot of beauty that is coming out of us making the changes that have needed to be made socially for like so long.
Despite the,
And
chronically online accusations, I would never have been able to do any of the things that I'm doing without the internet. I wouldn't
yeah.
have, you know, it, I wouldn't have found the college that I went to without the internet.
Mhm.
It wasn't just a Google search, it was somebody that I met online on an Avatar The Last Airbender fan forum in
Oh,
2007. I know.
period.
This person went to this very small college that's how I learned about it. And being able to pivot from, my imagined possible music life to this weird little place that I heard about on the internet undoubtedly shifted my entire life, clearly. And, I've met all of my partners online. Like, yes, accuse me of being chronically online. You are correct. The internet is a absolutely incredible tool that has made all of these incredible things that we've built happen. Even if it's also made them worse, would
Right.
hydroxychloroquine have become so spectacularized without the internet? No, absolutely not. Would the most viral moment of the pandemic, quote unquote, 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 made by Simone Gold, leader of America's Frontline Doctors, insurrectionist quack? Nope, she did that with the internet. So obviously, double-edged sword, but I will continue being grateful for it.
I fully agree. I think that pairing the power of the internet to connect us to people with in-person community organizing, obviously everybody has different abilities to do that in-person stuff, but I do think it's really important that even if you can't always show up to events in person, that you have that more local community. And so for me, my kind of vision of the future is a future that we have those online communities, we also have our in-person communities. And to me, it's like imagine all of these little groups all around the country and around the world. What if we were able to effectively communicate with one another and also organize in mass? Like we could actually do some really big stuff. And so that's kind of the direction that I'm trying to appeal to the masses about, because I think that that is where the power is.
The listener cannot see, but I've been silently snapping in agreement.
This is, to me, this is like the beginnings of a lot of that. And of course, people have been organizing for generations. Like we are able to do this kind of stuff because people in other communities for generations have also been doing this kind of work.
Unquestionably, anti-COVID work is only born out of work that came before it. Like, I do like to remind folks in this space that, we are doing a very specific kind of activism that nobody's ever done before. And so, we are learning as we go. But there are so many lessons from those who came before us that can be applied to our new reality, there are challenges that we are facing that are novel, unquestionably. There is nothing quite like the hydroxychloroquine spectacularization that I have studied in these last 4 years. There are no precedent for some of these experiences, but there's a lot that we can learn from, a lot that we can bring in, and it is imperative that we do learn those histories. Like we didn't just fall out of a coconut tree, if I may.
What would you say to people that have stopped taking precautions, or maybe just don't feel like it's not a super important issue in this moment?
To that person, I would tailor my answer based on their reasoning and the lifestyle that led them to stop taking precautions. So, for the listener who is trying to have these difficult conversations, unfortunately, they are situated in the details. But my overall message is that you can. My overall message is that every decision made to mitigate is better than a decision to not mitigate. Every layer that you choose to engage with when it comes to mitigation is better than if you had not chosen that layer. Going outside, opening a window, even if you're not doing anything else, lowering the possible viral load that you inhale does actually make a difference. And the downstream impacts of all of the people that you're prevented infection, it's immeasurable. So any decision that you make to mitigate is worth it.
Absolutely. I think that COVID is really an interesting thing because with pandemics, it is so much about, the collective. It's we all share air, but it's also so much about the individual and how those two things work together. And so I think it's really important that people understand that just because the government has decided that they don't give a fuck if we live or die doesn't mean, one, there's not still an issue, and two, that we as individuals, I hate to be a personal responsibility bitch, but that's where we're at right now. But we have an enormous amount of power as individuals to protect ourselves, to protect our loved ones, to protect our communities by taking as many mitigations as possible and incorporating those into our life. Like there's a lot of power in that, in taking agency over your health and not being a vector for spreading a disabling virus.
So all of this has reminded me of a quote that I brought out upon first vaccination in 2021. It's a longer quote, but a little bit from it. This is Eula Biss, who wrote a book that I highly recommend called On Immunity. She says, "We are protected not so much by our own skin, but what is beyond it." Public health is only as good as the bodies in which it exists. Public health is the public. We are the public. So by taking care of each other, by understanding that our bodies are porous and that what we put into community is what we get out in so many ways, that is the way forward. The connection, relationship, as one of my fantastic TikTok mutuals says, Christiana, she says relationship is the most valuable commodity. Is not the word she uses, but that's the word that's coming to mind. Like the most valuable commodity on Earth, and it is also the most abundant because we built it.
That's beautiful. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing about what it is that you do. And it's been very wonderful to talk to you, the super Sagittarian.
Thank you, thank you. Love to be a Sagittarius. Love to be a night owl. If anybody wants to talk to me about my chart, I'm always down to do that. It's all below the horizon line, except of course the North Node. So I
Yeah.
found that interesting. Very bottom heavy.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And, with Virgo risings, another thing that I think, Virgos, it's usually we talk about like they're so particular and, they have a lot of anxiety, which can certainly, be the case. But the other thing about it is that Virgos are so capable of one, getting a job done, like doing the damn thing. And by the way, your chart just screams like you get shit done. I'm sorry, but it does. You're just like you're and it has. I had the privilege of seeing, observing you before I had your astrology. And so it all kind of clicked. I was like, okay, that's why Abby is so busy and so capable of getting shit done. But the other thing about Virgo energy is that it's tremendously caring energy. But when we talk about care and compassion and love, people often, they'll go to other signs when we talk about that. But the way that a Virgo can love and show that love and demonstrate that love can be very practical acts of service, driving around Los Angeles in traffic and delivering masks to people, as I know that you do, showing up for them. I'm sure the work that you do when you're working at these events where you're providing masks to people, where you're, providing air purifiers so that people can have a better time, a safer time, having fun. That's all labor, and it's a labor of necessity, but it's also a labor of love, I think, for you. And so looking at your chart, it's like not only are you capable of doing the hard work, but I see there's a lot of care, and that community and the way that you interact with community seems to be a part of your everyday life. And so I think that people that are kind of living this way, that have incorporated community, like what it really means to show up for their community, what it means to show care, in just it's just a normal part of life. And that is what I see with you. So I think that the more that people can learn from people like you about how to, this is a normal part of your life. This is just you living your values, your very Sagittarian beliefs, you live them. And the more that I think people can adjust to that just being a normal part of their lives, and not something that they don't have to put the word activist under their name, from going forward, just to make these changes. This is just us kind of elevating what it means to be a human being, I think. Stepping into community. Community is a very human and essential human thing, because we're social creatures. And so I feel like you're a really wonderful example of that. So I hope people will follow you over on TikTok, where you do such amazing work and provide so much education.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Truly, my backlog of like stuff I want to do is long, many videos that I'd like to make, but regardless of all of the plans that I have, I feel like I always end up making something totally new, which is a classic little ADHD, just a little fun thing we do.
I think people underestimate how many things are born out of ADHD. Like how many gifts ADHD has given the world.
Nothing like the project that you end up doing just because you wanted to avoid the other project that you decided you wanted to do.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. You're just gifting the world through, indecision and having a lot of ideas. So,
every single day.
yeah, you're welcome, listeners.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to everybody that watches my videos. It's I've said it before and I will say it again that I've like never had a platform like this, and to think that it was born out of such a difficult time for all of us can be overwhelming. But I'm glad that we've been able to connect on this weird little app that I was at first very hesitant to join. I'm
Same.
glad I did. Has it ruined my life? I don't know, maybe, but it's also done so much, so I'm very grateful.
We love it. We love it. We love the complexity of the human experience here. So,
Oh, this is an Ed and A reference that lives so free in my head, where Rolf is like, many doors, Ed boys. Many truths, Ed boys.
period. This episode of Petty Astrology comes out on the day of this eclipse, this new moon in Libra. And this week's energy is really going to be dominated by this energy. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, which is all about this, it's a great time to revisit it. And remember, if you're not in parts of South America where the eclipse is actually going to be visible, this is simply a really powerful new moon. And of course, on a collective level with this eclipse, we are going through very big changes. But obviously, there's a lot of injustice in our world. And a lot of that is really coming to light right now. If you are paying attention, that should be very obvious to you. But remember, in this new moon energy, things are not going to be crystal clear or fixed right away. This is things coming to a close and a new start beginning. So it's important to focus on the things that you can control, which is your perspective, and also how you move forward in this moment. And we'll still be in that new moon energy through October 5th. So, we get some time to kind of chew on it, to move through it, and the news and world events are going to continue to be a lot to process. So just remember that constantly intaking information can only get us so far. So sometimes it's important that we actually step away from that we're just not constantly feeding ourselves information, getting ourselves into a state of stress or anxiety, because it becomes very difficult to actually do much that is helpful or constructive in that. So of course, we always want to feel the feelings, but we also need to be very aware of how much information we're taking in and what information is doing to us by constantly funneling it in our brains. We live in this information age where it has become very normalized to just constantly be inputting information and everybody's hot takes and all of this reporting happening from a million different directions. So it's our responsibility to manage that and care for ourselves by, paying attention to if that's actually helping us. So we have to do what we can, where we can, hopefully without panicking or spiraling into doomerism. And with this new moon, again, this is a great opportunity for us to renew our commitment to justice, as I said in last week's episode, and see where we might have fallen short on stepping up to demand social equity and deciding how we want to be a part of us actively moving forward as human beings. I think with the port strike happening here on the East Coast of the United States and more major storms on the way, we really need to keep our focus on supporting one another and also making sure that we have what we need for emergencies to the best of our ability. We have a couple tropical storms that are moving towards the United States and have the potential to develop into a hurricane. So, of course, we want to keep an eye on how those develop. And I do think that with the astrology, we have the potential to have something hitting towards the end of this week or into the weekend. So I would err on the side of caution if you are in one of those areas, and do your best to prepare for such an event. That may also mean for those of us who are not in an area that is being impacted, or those of us who have more than we need, that we continue to make connections with people who may not be as comfortable as we are, that we share resources, information, and help people with tasks they may be unable to do, or giving supplies, donating time, money. Other acts of mutual aid are going to be really important right now and as we go forward. Friday, October 4th in the US is going to feel a bit more serious and contemplative as we move into the weekend. So those of us who aren't literally in survival mode may have some time to process the many events of this week and strategize a bit more about how we want to implement whatever intentions that we've set for the new moon. And the important thing to know is that even if you don't sit down and actively write out intentions for the new moon, whatever energy that you are cultivating around that time, consider that your intention setting. I personally recommend people write stuff down so that they can revisit it later and track progress, because that stuff is very easy to overlook when we're actually living our lives. But whatever energy that you are cultivating around this new moon, that is the intention that you're setting. You are signaling to the universe that this is the stuff that you want to build on. So keep that in mind over the next few days. The energy of this week overall is very, don't push it. So don't push yourself too hard, and I wouldn't test other people right now either, because generally people are stressed. They're feeling how fucked up things are. And they may have different explanations than you for why that is, but in general, people are feeling it. So Over the weekend, many of us are going to be confronted with how our thoughts and feelings meet action. Yeah, things are not good, but where does that leave us? I do think that we'll see people acting out. I could see potentially an individual act of violence making headlines on Saturday because America, and we don't have enough going on already, I guess. So, all this to say, people are going to be very sensitive this week. And I think some people are going to choose to channel that in unhelpful ways. And of course, we have the ongoing escalations in the Middle East. I'm also thinking about those living in the devastation of hurricanes right now and the interpersonal violence I'm hearing about, where people are having to protect their resources from other people who are also probably trying to survive these climate disasters. I am hoping that enough resources are able to make their way to these areas to provide some relief so that we don't see any of that, but it's just something to keep in mind. And I will make sure to include some mutual aid links for hurricane relief in the show notes. I do really think that this week it's important to take stock of our emergency preparedness, and I know that a lot of people have that top of mind right now. So it's important that we don't panic or rush to buy things or hoard, but get a move on it if it's not something that you have already done. I don't think that this is the last horrible weather event of 2024. And like I said, we may have more hurricanes on the way right now. So the reality is that climate crisis is coming for us all. And our government should be using our tax dollars not to fund genocides around the world, but to prepare for that. I know, wild, novel concept. And also stopping things that continue to destroy the climate. But they're not. So we're going to have to help each other now and also work together to demand that those things get done from a government level. And this is one of the many reasons that I have been a broken record with y'all about community organizing, about mutual aid, because we are seeing exactly why right now. About 1 million different examples. This is where we're going to be at for Pluto and Aquarius. It doesn't mean that it's going to be chaos and hell every day, but we have some very serious collective issues that need to be addressed. And that's going to require organization. That's going to require knowing people in your community. That's going to require connecting with people who live outside of your community as well. So there's a lot to think about and a lot of big feelings coming up this week. And you may feel like you want to avoid those, but I'm going to urge you to channel those feelings into creativity, into self-healing, into connection with others, and of course, with taking action, especially as we hit this weekend. And like I always say, big energy also means the potential for powerful transformations and shifts internally. So I promise you that we can move through this moment as long as we work together and take whatever is in our power to take action on seriously. The moon moves into Sagittarius on Sunday, October 6th, so things should lighten up a bit. I have to say, on the Monday scale for Monday, October 7th, it's a little Monday-ish. It's not the worst Monday that we've seen in a minute, but it's a Monday. And the sense of restriction or confinement, or maybe just not being quite where you want to be, that is possible on Monday, that can lead you to having a new vision for yourself or adding to your existing vision in some way, because it is very important with all of the energy that we're facing right now that we do continue to look forward. And Sagittarius energy can be extraordinarily helpful with that sort of optimism and forward thinking. You know how they say rejection is redirection? I think that's a really good theme for the beginning of next week. And what I mean by that is that if things aren't going the way that you want them to go, or if there's just a little something missing from life for you, you want to pay attention to what you're picking up on those days, because that is going to give you a better idea of what you need to adjust in order to bring something new and exciting and something that you can learn from into your life. There are a lot of opportunities in this coming week to work on our mindset and shift our perspective. And I think that's a really important thing right now because we are seeing so much that would encourage us to be negative and to see the worst case scenario. But don't forget that while all of this is happening, we are also seeing mutual aid groups stepping up. We are seeing random citizens flying drones into remote areas to get people life-saving medication as they're stranded from a hurricane. Tuesday, October 8th, to me seems like a great day for creativity. It also seems like a potentially really great day to make more connections with other people, which, we can do that anyway, but I'm just highlighting a day that might be, more fortunate for it. But this is also a great day to continue to use our voices because a lot of people are responsible for a lot of these failures that we're seeing, and it's government failures, it's institutional and systemic failures that we're seeing because Pluto is at the end of Capricorn. And this is exactly the kind of thing that I was talking about. Our systems were not built for the good of regular people, and we are having to confront that head on. And it's very uncomfortable and it's painful and people are losing their lives over it. But it's very important that we keep our focus and we use the tools that we have at our disposal, which is our connections with one another, our skills, our mindsets, our visions for the future, and we make some shit happen. There's a lot of good coming out of some really ugly situations. And I know that each and every person listening to this podcast right now can be a part of that good. If you need to decompress at all this week, I want to remind you that I have multiple meditations available for sponsors over in my Patreon. I also put a bonus episode out for Patreon sponsors with all my thoughts on the port strike. So that is available right now if you'd like to go listen to that too. And of course, if you are looking for community, well, guess what? We got that over in Patreon. Yes, even for the free members. And if you are a paid subscriber, if you're a sponsor of this podcast, you also get access to our Discord community, which is called the Astro Den. And it's a great place for some emotional support memes, or maybe you just want to chat with some friendly, compassionate people who also like astrology. I'll put the links to all of that in the show notes. I would like to thank my Patreon sponsors because they're the ones who make this podcast possible and they make it ad-free, which is really nice for all of us. That's it for this week's episode. Tune in next week for even more petty astrology.